Max stepped off the transport ship, his boots landing on the alien soil with a soft thud. His mission was simple: diplomatic discussions with the species on Zura's planet, an agreement to expand human presence in the galaxy. He adjusted his uniform, scanning the surroundings. Lush, green terrain with towering trees, a bit more vibrant than Earth's forests, but still oddly familiar. Everything about this place screamed peaceful, until he met her. Queen Zura stood tall, her figure regal, an imposing presence, yet strangely mesmerizing. Her skin shimmered in the light, an almost ethereal glow that seemed to intensify with each step she took. Her eyes locked onto his as if she had been waiting for him her entire life. "You're my first human," she declared with an intensity that made Max chuckle. "Be gentle, or claim me. I'll follow you anywhere." Max raised an eyebrow, unsure whether she was serious or just putting on some kind of elaborate alien act. It was, after all, a diplomatic mission. So, like any professional would, he decided to play it off with a grin, his usual self-assured smirk plastered on his face. "Claim you, huh? You sure that's how this works? You're not exactly my type," he quipped, tossing the comment out casually. He figured the conversation would take a lighter turn. But Zura didn't smile back. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and a strange, almost predatory look flashed across her features. "You'll find, human, that I don't get rejected." Max was still trying to figure out if this was a cultural misunderstanding or just some alien flirtation when Zura started walking towards him. And when she didn't stop, he found himself stepping back, instinctively. She was tall, far taller than most humans, and even in the peaceful environment of the planet, the intensity of her approach felt dangerous. "So, if I don't claim you," Max started, keeping his voice steady, "what happens?" Zura came to a stop, her presence overpowering as she loomed before him, inches away from his face. "You will claim me," she repeated. "Or I will claim you." He wasn't entirely sure what that meant. But with her scent, an almost intoxicating combination of floral and something deeper that tugged at his instincts, Max felt a stir of something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, he wasn't afraid of her, but a weird kind of curiosity. "You know, back on Earth, we have a saying," Max began, his humor coming to his defense once again. "Something about the chase being better than the catch?" Zura tilted her head. "You speak of humans like you know your kind so well." Max just shrugged, still playing along. "We're not as predictable as you might think." "What exactly do you mean by claiming?" Zura's lips curled into a small smile. "When a queen desires a mate, she claims him, marking him for herself, and taking him wherever she chooses." Max's smirk faltered slightly. This wasn't the banter he was used to. There was an underlying seriousness in her voice, like she meant every word. "So, just to be clear," he rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortable. "You want me to, mark you? In the traditional human way?" "Human ways are irrelevant," Zura said, her voice low and filled with a kind of amusement that Max couldn't quite read. "Your reluctance is intriguing." Max chuckled nervously, taking a few steps back. "Yeah, well, I'm not really looking for a lifetime commitment right now. How about a nice handshake instead?" Zura took a step forward. "You mock me now, but you will not mock for long." Max watched as she circled around him, every movement graceful and predatory. "I don't know, lady. I've been to some wild places, but this one's got a vibe." Zura paused, her gaze never leaving him. "You will feel it too, human. The urge. The attraction. Your body will respond, whether you wish it or not. I guarantee it." Max was starting to feel a bit more uncomfortable. "Yeah, about that. I don't think your, pheromones are working on me." A small laugh escaped Zura's lips. It was a sound that might have been sweet under different circumstances, but right now it felt almost mocking. "Pheromones are powerful, but they are not everything. It's your mind that resists, not your body." Max was about to respond, but before he could speak, Zura stepped in closer, bringing them within inches of each other. She leaned down slightly, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "I will follow you, human. Until you claim me. You will not escape. His heart rate quickened, though he still kept his cool, playing it off as a mere show of bravado. Oh, I see. So I'm your prisoner now? Her voice dropped to a whisper, filled with a kind of quiet intensity. Not yet. But soon. When your resistance crumbles. Max swallowed, feeling an odd tension in the air. Despite himself, he could feel the pull. Maybe it was her power. Maybe it was something deeper. The connection between them was undeniable, though he couldn't put his finger on why. Well, he said, forcing a laugh, I guess I'll be the one to claim victory here, huh? Or is that what you're planning to do? Zora's eyes flashed with something dangerous and mischievous. You will find out soon enough, human. Whether you want it or not. Max couldn't help but laugh awkwardly, realizing he might have just bitten off more than he could chew. As much as he'd like to get away, part of him wondered if he was already in way too deep. Her next words hung in the air like a promise, and a threat. You'll regret making me wait. Max cleared his throat, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. Yeah, well, I guess I'll just have to get used to the idea of being followed. By a queen. With an obsession. Fun times ahead. As Zora took another step toward him, her presence grew heavier, the atmosphere thickening with the tension. Max's humor couldn't mask the undeniable truth. Zora was serious. She wasn't going to back off. And if he wasn't careful, he might just find himself a lot more entangled in this than he'd ever anticipated. Fine. Max muttered under his breath, finally accepting the inevitability of it all. Let's see where this goes. I'm just not making any promises. Zora smiled, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. That is all I need, human. I'll follow you anywhere. And with that, Max's diplomatic mission took a sharp turn into something far more complicated than he'd ever imagined. Zora's persistence was beginning to get under Max's skin. No matter how much he tried to sidestep her, she found ways to maneuver into his life. It started with the subtle things, appearing in his personal quarters, joining him for meals, and showing up at every diplomatic meeting as though she had a vested interest in the proceedings. He couldn't even go to the restroom without her lingering outside the door, her eyes burning with curiosity, waiting for him to emerge. Seriously, do you have a personal space invasion clause in your alien contracts? Max grumbled as he walked into the hallway, finding Zora once again in his path. Zora stood tall and regal, her arms folded across her chest. I do not need a contract, human. I am a queen. I am entitled to whatever I wish. Max sighed dramatically, rubbing his temples. He couldn't keep playing this game forever. But Zora wasn't going to let up. She'd made it clear, if he wasn't going to claim her, then she would claim him. And somehow, that statement became more ominous every time she said it. You know, I thought we were supposed to be having diplomatic talks, not whatever this is, Max said, doing his best to keep the irritation out of his voice. I've got actual work to do. Like real work. Zora didn't flinch. She only smirked, the expression on her face both unsettling and mesmerizing. I am your work now, human. You have no choice but to deal with it. Max paused, then gave a defeated chuckle. What is this, some kind of courtship ritual? Because I gotta tell you, back home we usually start with dinner, maybe some light conversation. I am not interested in your human customs, Zora said, stepping closer. The subtle scent of her pheromones lingered in the air, more intoxicating than ever. I want you to see the real me. To understand that you cannot escape me. Max took another step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the comm panel on his belt. But before he could activate it, Zora's gaze locked onto his. There was something intense and unnerving in her eyes, something that felt too powerful to resist. You know, she continued, voice lowering to a near purr, I don't need your human rituals to understand your kind. I've studied you, observed you. You think you are in control. But you are not. Max tried to maintain his cool, but the closer she got, the harder it was to ignore the electric tension building between them. He was getting frustrated. Her presence was like a magnetic pull, her every word designed to mess with his head. I'm not some toy, Zura, Max said, his voice firm despite the confusion bubbling inside him. I don't respond to. You do not respond to what, human? Zura cut in, her voice a mix of amusement and challenge. Are you not human enough to fall for your own desires? Max's throat tightened, and the air around him suddenly felt thick. He could feel the weight of her gaze, the pressure of her words. You really think you've got me all figured out, don't you? I do, Zura said without hesitation. I know what you need. And I know how to make you realize it. Max could feel his composure slipping. He didn't want to feel this way. He didn't want to be affected by her, not like this. But there was a pull. A draw. Her words, her proximity, her scent, it all seemed to seep into his every pore. You don't know anything about me, Max said, trying to steady himself. I'm not some helpless human who cannot resist what he wants. Zura interrupted. I know you, Captain. I know you far better than you know yourself. Max's jaw clenched, and for a moment, all he could do was stare at her. The audacity of her words was astounding. She was relentless, and it was making his head spin. How did she know how to press all the right buttons? Her fingers brushed his arm as she stepped even closer. I've been patient, but you're running out of time, human. You can resist all you want, but I will follow you. I will stay with you. Until you claim me. Max opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't deny the effect she was having on him, the way her presence seemed to cloud his thoughts. He wanted to break free from the magnetic pull of her, but it felt impossible. Okay, let's say I'm not interested in this, claiming business, Max said, doing his best to regain some semblance of control. What happens then? You just follow me around? Zura's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. That's exactly what happens. You will never escape me. Not unless you submit. Max felt a shiver run down his spine at her words, but he refused to give in to it. He was Max Bennett, damn it. He was used to controlling situations, not being controlled by them. I'm not submitting to anything, Zura. You can keep following me, but that's where it ends. Zura leaned in closer, her lips nearly grazing his ear. We will see, human. We will see just how long you last before you beg me to claim you. The boldness of her words left Max breathless. He knew he was playing with fire, and he didn't know if he was ready for what came next. But what did it say about him that part of him was intrigued? What did it mean that he couldn't stop the thoughts swirling in his mind, the confusion over whether he was really as immune to her as he'd initially believed? He needed to get away. He needed to put some distance between them. You're making this way too difficult, Max muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Fine, you want to follow me? Fine. I'll deal with it. But don't expect me to fall into your little game. Zura smiled, her eyes narrowing in triumph. It's not a game, human. It's fate. Max couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Yeah, well, fate's got a hell of a way of throwing curveballs. He turned and walked down the hallway, not bothering to look back. But Zura's steps echoed behind him, unwavering, a constant reminder of just how deep he was in this tangled mess. He couldn't outrun her, not anymore. The more he tried to resist, the more impossible it became to ignore the pull between them. And as Zura's voice rang out behind him, the words held more weight than he'd ever anticipated. You'll regret making me wait. Max wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the charade. Zura was everywhere. Every meeting, every single moment of downtime, she was there, her presence like a shadow that never left. It didn't matter how many times he tried to brush her off, or how many excuses he came up with. She followed him like a persistent storm cloud, thunder looming with every step she took. Another meeting, Captain? Zura's voice interrupted his thoughts as she stood in the doorway of his quarters. I'm sure the humans won't mind if you take a break. Max closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He didn't have time for this. They were negotiating trade deals with a dozen species, and all he could think about was her. Every time he tried to focus, her scent, her voice, her presence, it all distracted him. I don't have time for this. he muttered, not looking up from his data pad. I'm not asking for much, Zura replied smoothly, walking toward him. Her movements were fluid, almost predatory. Just a little attention. A little of your time. Surely, that's not too much to ask for a queen. Max felt his chest tighten at the way she said it. The way she said queen, like it was a command, like he had no choice in the matter. But he did have a choice. He always had a choice. But damn, she was persistent. He looked up at her, trying to maintain the upper hand. I don't have time to play games, Zura. I'm not here for courtship. Zura's eyes darkened for a moment, a flash of something more serious behind the playful facade. She didn't need to say anything for Max to understand. She wasn't playing anymore. I don't play, human. I claim. Max snorted, trying to laugh off the tension that crept up his spine. Claim me? You can't just. Why do you resist? Zura interrupted, leaning closer. You can feel it, can't you? You can feel the pull between us. I see it in your eyes, in the way your heart races when I'm near. You're not as immune as you think. Max didn't know what to say. He was caught. There was no denying that every time she was near, his body betrayed him. Her presence affected him in ways he couldn't explain. But he wasn't ready to admit that. He wasn't ready to give in. I don't know what you're talking about, Max said, his voice cold. He stood up, trying to put some distance between them. I'm not your prey, Zura. I'm not some alien trophy to be claimed. Zura stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. You think you're the one in control? That you can resist me forever? Max's jaw clenched. I'm not resisting you. I'm just not interested. Oh, but you are, Zura said, her voice a whisper, like a secret only he could hear. I can see it in the way you look at me, in the way you try so hard to act like you don't want me. Max could feel the heat rising to his face. Damn it. She was right. He couldn't deny it any longer. He did want her. More than he wanted to admit. But admitting it to her? That would be giving up, and Max Bennett didn't give up. Fine, he said, trying to change the subject. You want me? You've got me. But it's not going to be like you think. You're not going to just waltz in here and get what you want. Zura's smile was both teasing and predatory. You think you're the one in charge, but you're just as much a part of this as I am, human. You can run from it, but you'll only make it harder on yourself. You'll see. Max's mind was racing. He had to do something, say something, to stop this madness before it went any further. But every time he tried, Zura was there, pressing closer, making him doubt his own resolve. She wasn't playing by human rules. And he had no idea how to navigate the game she was setting up. Look, Max said, his frustration bubbling up. I don't want to be here, playing your little game. You don't get to claim me just because you feel like it. It doesn't work that way. Zura didn't flinch. It doesn't work that way in your world, maybe. But we are not in your world. We're in mine. And here, I make the rules. Max's heart beat faster, but he tried to ignore it. He wasn't going to be pushed around. Not like this. Not by her. But every time she got closer, every time she spoke with that calm authority, the more he felt like he was losing the battle. Fine, Max said, almost to himself. You want to follow me around? Fine. But I'm not going to just fall into line with whatever you want. Zura's smile widened, like she'd won some small victory. You already have, human. You just haven't realized it yet. Max's frustration reached its peak. He turned away, trying to hide the storm of emotions that had been building inside him. I don't have time for this, he muttered, feeling the sting of his own weakness. You always have time for me, Zura said, her voice filled with a strange, knowing confidence. And you will, until you can't resist anymore. Max's mind was racing. He needed space. He needed to get away from her, to think, to come up with a plan. But no matter where he went, she was always there. Always watching. Always waiting. He turned back to her, frustration and confusion mixing in his chest. This isn't going to work. You can't just keep following me, Zura. You're going to push me too far. Zura's eyes softened for the briefest of moments. I'm not trying to push you, human. I'm trying to show you. Show you what you've been running from. Max felt a pang in his chest, the truth of her words sinking in, but he refused to admit it. He refused to let her win. You're delusional, he said, his voice sharp. I'm not falling for whatever it is you think you're doing here. Zura stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. You already have, she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Max's resolve was starting to crack. He could feel the weight of her words, the truth in them, but he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it. You're playing with fire, Zura, he said, his voice low, but unsure. And I'm not going to get burned. Zura's smile was almost soft now, a mixture of affection and something far more dangerous. You've already been burned, human. And you'll come to realize that the fire was always meant to be yours. Max didn't know how to respond. All he knew was that Zura was playing a game he couldn't understand, and somehow, he was already losing. Max stood in the middle of the war room, his mind a blur of confusion and frustration. Zura had followed him into every corner of his life, even here, into the most high-stakes part of his mission. She was everywhere. And somehow, that felt like a trap he was too deep in to escape. He was reviewing reports on a potential conflict brewing in another sector when Zura entered, her imposing presence filling the room in a way that made every single eye in the room snap toward her. She didn't even acknowledge the other officers, didn't care that they were discussing important matters. All that mattered was him. And there she was, standing behind him like she had every right to be there. You're late, Max muttered, though it was more out of irritation than any real authority. He wasn't sure why he even bothered. She wasn't exactly known for respecting his boundaries. I'm never late, Zura responded with a quiet smirk, her voice oozing confidence. I simply arrive at the moment that matters most. Max didn't look at her. He couldn't afford to. Not now. He had to focus. This isn't about you. It's about a possible war, Zura. Can you back off for 5 minutes? Her steps were soft, almost predatory, as she moved closer. A war? How boring. I'm far more interested in what you and I are doing, human. Max clenched his jaw, his hands tightening on the datapad in front of him. I told you, I don't have time for whatever this is. There are lives at stake. Oh, but there's only one life that matters to you right now, and it's mine, Zura said with a quiet intensity, her voice lowering. You can hide behind your military strategies, but you know what you really need. Max felt an unsettling tightness in his chest. He couldn't let her win. He couldn't let her distract him any longer. He wasn't some pawn to be used in her little game of conquest. Stop, Max finally said, spinning around to face her, his voice sharp. You think I'm some fool? You think I'll fall for this? Zura's lips curved into a smile that wasn't quite kind, but also not cruel. You already have. You just refuse to admit it. You can keep pretending, but you know deep down that you want this. Want me. Max's heart skipped a beat, but he refused to show it. I don't want you, Zura. Not like that. Liar, she said, stepping closer, her gaze never leaving his. You want me more than you want this mission. I can see it in your eyes. Every time you look at me, I can feel it. The pull. Max gritted his teeth. She was right. He could feel it. But he wouldn't admit it. He couldn't. She was an alien queen, and he was supposed to be a human diplomat. He couldn't let his emotions drive him. Not now. Don't pretend you know me, Max said, his voice shaking slightly. You don't know anything about me. Oh, but I do, Zura whispered, her breath warm against his skin as she moved closer still. I know everything about you. Your desires, your resistance, your confusion. I can read you like no one else. Max stepped back, feeling the pressure build in his chest. He was supposed to be in control, but every time she got closer, he felt his control slipping. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. But here she was, breaking down every wall he'd carefully built up. Enough, Max said, raising his voice. You need to leave. Now. Zura's expression softened, but there was no denying the underlying power in her stance. You can't push me away, human. You've tried, but you won't succeed. I will follow you everywhere. Until you claim me. Max's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or punch something. I'm not going to claim you. That's not how this works. You're wrong, Zura replied, her tone quiet but certain. It's exactly how this works. And I will make you see it. Max's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse racing. He didn't want to give in, didn't want to feel this way. But every word she spoke seemed to shatter his resolve. He was slipping. He could feel it. I'm not playing your game, Max said, his voice raw. I don't care how much you follow me. I'm not going to bend to your will. Zura's eyes gleamed with something that was both dangerous and exciting. You think you can resist me? You think you can run from this? You're mine, Max. You've always been. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. No. Zura stepped closer, placing a hand on his chest, her fingers tracing a line that sent a shock of electricity through him. You can keep saying no, but we both know the truth. You've wanted this from the moment I claimed you. Max's breath hitched in his throat, his body betraying him as he struggled to push her away. But something in him, something deep inside, didn't want to fight it anymore. It was easier to give in, to let her take control. He closed his eyes, trying to regain his composure. I'm not yours, Zura. I'm not some prize to be claimed. You are mine, she whispered, her voice almost tender now, her lips brushing against his ear. And soon you'll beg me to claim you. Max's body burned with a mix of frustration and desire. He couldn't deny it any longer. She was right. There was something between them. Something he couldn't fight. He was caught. And he wasn't sure if he wanted to escape anymore. Fine, Max said, his voice barely a whisper, his resolve crumbling. Claim me. But I won't beg. Zura's smile was slow, satisfied. Oh, but you will. I promise you, Max. You will. Max's mind was spinning, his body reacting against his will. He couldn't stop this. He didn't know how to. She was right, he had wanted this. But that didn't mean he had to admit it to her. Not yet. Not until it was too late. And deep down, Max knew, it was already too late.